Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. The sparkling crystal chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel in New York shed a warm glow on the wedding rehearsal dinner, as the light danced between the subtle silver lines of Dr. Mason Reed's perfectly tailored Tom Ford suits. As a 52-year-old top cardiac surgeon at Mount Sinai Hospital, he has an impressive stature, tall, imposing, with steel gray hair, and carrying the confident aura that only comes from a man who holds life and death in his hands every day. He's saved countless lives, but tonight is about an accomplishment of a different kind, the wedding of his daughter Charlotte. Mason looked around, noting with satisfaction how the carefully arranged white orchids and pale pink roses perfectly complemented the hotel's classical architecture. Every detail of tomorrow's multi-million-dollar wedding represents years of careful planning and hard work and savings on his part. The guest list reads like a who's who of New York's medical elite, with hospital board members and celebrities mingling over champagne. Champagne, Dr. Reed. A waiter appeared beside him, crystal goblets on a tray. Thanks. Mason took the glass and took a small sip while observing his wife, Vanessa, navigating the room and socializing. The 48-year-old still turned heads in a burgundy Vera Wang gown, with her blonde hair styled in elegant waves. She was grinning at something Alexander Chun, the hospital's chief of surgery, had said, touching his arm lightly with the charm she'd practiced for years. Their young children, Natalie and Daniel, have inherited their mother's social grace. Natalie, 23 and in her first year of medical school, is mesmerizing a group of young doctors with vivid gestures as she describes her recent rotating internship. Daniel, 19 and home from his freshman vacation at Yale, has somehow managed to attract a small group of admiring young women, even though his sister is the center of attention tonight. Daddy, Charlotte's voice interrupted his observation. His oldest daughter approached him in a white Oscar de la Renta cocktail dress, her engagement ring sparkling in the light. The string quartet is about to take a break. Should we have the DJ start getting ready? Mason checked his Patek Philippe watch, a gift from a grateful patient whose heart he had rebuilt. Perfect timing, princess. Let Thomas coordinate. You thought of everything. Charlotte smiled brightly and reached down to straighten his tie. I can't believe tomorrow is finally here. Thomas's parents were very happy with all the arrangements. Speaking of Thomas, where's my future son-in-law? Trapped in a conversation with Uncle Eduardo's wife about medical malpractice insurance, Charlotte rolled her eyes. I'm supposed to rescue him. Eduardo Meyer's mention of the name caused Mason to glance toward the ballroom entrance. His best friend of 25 years was paradoxically late, though it wasn't entirely surprising. Eduardo always had a flair for dramatic entrances, a trait that sometimes angered their more conservative colleagues, but never bothered Mason. After all, there are certain quirks you have to forgive for someone who has been there for you, from celebrating career milestones to supporting you in your post-surgery recovery. As if summoned by the thought, Eduardo strides into the ballroom. The 54-year-old displays the glamour of age with a Mediterranean flamboyance, his dark hair artfully trimmed to hide the gray, and his tailored Italian suits emphasizing his slender frame. He catches Mason's gaze across the room and raises his hand. If it isn't my favorite heart cowboy. Eduardo's voice came out, drawing guffaws from nearby guests used to his exaggerated ways. He hugged Mason warmly and patted him on the back. Sorry I'm late. There was a complicated counseling session that dragged on a bit. You're just in time for Thomas's father's toast, Mason replied, noting a strange hint of nervousness in his friend's smile. When Vanessa approached to greet him, Eduardo, darling. Vanessa gave him a courtesy kiss on the cheek, her perfume Clive Christian No. 1. A Christmas gift from Mason, lingering in the air. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about us. Forgetting my best friend's daughter's wedding rehearsal? Never. Eduardo's hand seemed to linger a little too long around Vanessa's waist before taking a step back. Although I did have to reschedule 2 surgeries for tomorrow morning. I'll arrive at the cathedral a little later than planned. Something in their interaction struck a discordant note in Mason's mind, but before he could analyze it, Thomas's father was already pleading for attention, tapping the champagne glass with a crystal knife. May I have your attention, please, said William Clark III, managing partner of one of Manhattan's top law firms, standing on the small stage where the string quartet had played before. I'd like to propose a toast to our children and to this incredible family we're about to join." Mason moved to stand beside his daughter, gently placing a hand on her shoulder while William continued. "When Thomas first told us about Charlotte, Caroline and I knew she was special, a remarkable Mount Sinai in her father's footsteps young woman whose heart was as remarkable as her surgical skills. But meeting Mason and Vanessa Reed really showed us where her exceptional quality comes from." The speech continued, hitting all the right notes about family tradition and hope for the future. Mason smiles at the appropriate moments, but his attention is drawn to a subtle exchange between his wife and Eduardo. An almost imperceptible meeting of eyes between them when William mentions family values, and Eduardo's hand jerks slightly in Vanessa's direction before he realizes he's there. "So," William is concluding, "here's to Thomas and Charlotte, and to the union of our families. May tomorrow be the beginning of a life full of joy and authenticity for you." To Thomas and Charlotte. The crowd responded by raising their glasses in celebration, and the party returned to its original lively atmosphere. Mason excused himself to go check on the final details of tomorrow's ceremony, and the wedding coordinator at the Plaza Hotel had messaged to ask for final confirmation of the morning's delivery arrangements. The curved corridor leading to the business center was quieter, the sounds of the party fading with each step. Mason had just finished his schedule audit when a sound coming from a nearby niche caught his attention. Years of training in precision surgery had given his ears the ability to pick up on subtle sounds, a crucial skill when it came to listening for the slightest irregularities in a heartbeat. That old fool really broke the bank for this wedding. His wife's voice was low but clear, a million for his princess. Mason freezes midway through, his hand resting on the ornate wood paneling of the hallway. He's always had expensive tastes, Eduardo's distinctive accent. Remember how we convinced him that his vasectomy was a success? That was your doing, darling. Vanessa laughed softly. All 3 kids are yours, and now he's paying for this $1 million wedding too. The world seemed to tilt slightly, but Mason's surgeon stability kept him perfectly still, his breathing controlled and quiet. "Dad's such an idiot," Charlotte's voice, no longer containing the warmth she'd shown a few minutes ago. "At least Father Biology will be walking me down the aisle tomorrow, too." "Keep your voice down, dear." Eduardo's tone was more amused than worried. "Though I doubt he can hear us. Across that awful string quartet he insists on." "I still can't believe he never questioned why none of the kids looked like him," Natalie added, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your father only sees what he wants to see," Vanessa replied. "And that's what makes him a brilliant surgeon and a terrible judge. He was so focused on his heart that he missed everything else." "Have the children's monthly deposits been arranged?" Eduardo asked, his tone shifting to business-like efficiency. "As always," Vanessa confirmed, "disguised as payment for your academic instruction. He never looks at those deals." "Thomas's family totally bought into the mentor story too," Charlotte added, "and thought how wonderful it was that Dad's best friend cared so much about our education." The conversation turned to tomorrow's arrangements, but Mason had heard enough. He moved silently back to the business center, his mind already sorting and analyzing the information with the same precision as surgery. 20 minutes later, he was sitting in his private office in the business center, his laptop open to show his banking dashboard. The modern minimalism of the room, all clean lines and subtle lighting, matched his current state of mind. His hands, steady as ever, moved over the keyboard, accessing years of financial records. There they are, regular transfers from Eduardo Meyer to his children's accounts, going back to their births. Quarterly payments are marked as Academic Mentoring Program Mount Sinai Initiative. The amount increases as each child gets older, with significant increases in the college years. His first call was to James Chun, his attorney and Alexander's brother. "James, I need you to implement the Lazarus Protocol immediately." "Yes, the full program we discussed last year." "No, this is not a drill." The second call went to Sarah Winters, a private investigator who hired her after noticing discrepancies in the children's medical records at the time seen by him as a professional precaution against paranoia. "Mrs. Winters, the surveillance program we discussed. I need everything you have on Eduardo Meyer and my wife, going back 25 years. Prioritize." The last call was to his Dublin banker, where he established citizenship after treating Ireland's health minister another precaution that seemed excessive at the time. Mr. O'Connor, initiate the transfer sequence we have prepared, full spectrum, effective immediately. By midnight, the full scope of the betrayal had been documented in a folder on his laptop. Eduardo, as director of the Mount Sinai Vasectomy Clinic, falsified records of his procedures. The results of a DNA test ordered under the cover of routine medical screening confirmed Eduardo's paternity of all 3 children. Bank records reveal a complex web of payments and accounts linking his family to his alleged best friend. The Plaza Business Center has been empty for hours. In the distance, he could hear the last of the guests leaving the wedding rehearsal dinner. His cell phone rang with a text from Vanessa. Coming up soon? Everyone's asking where you've been. Mason closed his laptop and carefully slid it into his leather bag. Tomorrow morning, he will demonstrate all the skills that 25 years of precision surgery has taught him about removing diseased tissue from other health systems. Tomorrow's ceremony would indeed mark a new beginning, just not the kind they were expecting. He replied, had to deal with some final details. Ready for anything tomorrow. It wasn't a lie. Dr. Mason Reed had never been more prepared. When he returned to his hotel suite, Vanessa was already in bed, sliding her phone through the evening's photos. She saw him enter and smiled the perfect smile she had practiced for years. You're back, honey, and I was beginning to worry. Just making sure everything goes well tomorrow, he replied, his voice pleasant and controlled, and that everything is organized. You've always been so detail-oriented, she murmured, reaching for him as he passed the bed. It's one of the reasons I love you. Mason moved just enough to avoid her touch and kept his smile. Tomorrow's a big day, best to get some rest. In the bathroom, he took longer than usual to complete his evening routine, studying himself in the mirror. Looking back, his face had not changed. Remarkable features, clear gray eyes, the same steady gaze that had guided him through countless surgeries. But behind that familiar facade, something has fundamentally changed. He thought of that moment in surgery when he finally located the source of the problem, the clogged artery, the failing valve, the tumor hiding behind healthy tissue. That moment of clarity when you know exactly what needs to be done. This is such a moment. When he finally slid into the bed, Vanessa was asleep, her breathing deep and regular. In a few hours, she will wake up to discover the true cost of her decades of deception. But for the moment, Dr. Mason Reed closed his eyes, his thoughts already moving with surgical precision through tomorrow's procedures. The night passed serenely, and the thick walls of the Plaza Hotel drowned out the constant rhythm of the city. In their respective rooms at the end of the corridor, his children, Eduardo's children, sleep peacefully, dreaming of tomorrow's festivities, none of them realizing that the biggest show of their lives has just reached its final act. In the darkness, Mason allowed himself a small smile. Tomorrow will indeed be memorable, just not in the way they planned. The first rays of dawn seeped through the cracks in the curtains of the Plaza Hotel suite, and Vanessa was still asleep when Mason awoke. He rose gently, his movements almost silent, like the precision and control he had honed over years in the operating room. He picked up his cell phone and turned off the alarm, even though he didn't need it. For the past 6 hours, he'd hardly actually slept, instead going over his plan in his head over and over again, like preparing for a complex heart surgery. In the bathroom, he showered and shaved, moving as usual. The man in the mirror looked almost unchanged, the same steel gray hair, the same sharp gaze, the same firm jawline. The outside did not reflect the tsunami inside him. He put on his pre-prepared casual clothes instead of his scheduled wedding attire and left the suite unnoticed. The hotel corridors were empty, with only a few cleaning staff to start the day. Mason nodded his head in greeting, his pace smooth and unhurried. No one would suspect that the brilliant heart surgeon woke up so early on his daughter's wedding day only to carry out an elaborate revenge plan. The lights are on in the business center. Mason enters using his VIP access card and immediately opens his laptop. His first call was to James Chun for confirmation. Has the plan been activated? His voice was surprisingly calm. Yes, exactly as instructed, James replied. The transfer of funds has been completed and all documents are ready. Legal papers will be served within an hour. Where's the gift box? Sarah's team is waiting at the church. Each box is placed according to the seating chart, with special editions for William Clark and the Blake family. Mason nodded softly, though James on the other end of the line couldn't see it. What about the hospital board? Documents have been sent to each member's private email address, labeled Urgent Major Medical Malpractice. They've called an emergency meeting. After hanging up, Mason opens an encrypted folder containing all the evidence he's collected in the last 48 hours. Sarah Winter's findings are shocking. It turns out that not only did Eduardo's affair with Vanessa last 25 years, but their deception touched almost every aspect of his life. The first is medical fraud. As director of Mount Sinai's vasectomy clinic, Eduardo falsified Mason's surgical records. A detailed analysis of medical records shows that at least 20 other wealthy New York clients received similar special services, faked surgeries, forged documents, and, of course, high private payments that were not on the hospital's official books. Sarah found records of private correspondence between Eduardo and Vanessa, from initial flirtatious text messages to more recent discussions about what to do about wedding favors. Even more shocking is the extent of the children's involvement. 3 children who have known the truth since they were teenagers, but have chosen to remain silent, enjoying the privileged life Mason provides while privately mocking his ignorance. Mason opened the next folder, which contained the DNA test results. As a doctor, it wasn't difficult to obtain samples, hair and saliva samples from routine checkups, blood samples he had collected over the years in the name of family medical history research. The scientific evidence is incontrovertible. There is a 99.9997% probability that Charlotte, Natalie, and Daniel are related to Eduardo, and there is no biological link to Mason. The last folder is the heaviest and contains bank records. Mason had wondered why Eduardo was so generous with his children, but now the truth came out. The transfers, labeled academic advising, were actually the biological father's financial support for his children. What's even more outrageous is that the money came from Eduardo's healthcare fraud proceeds, some of which even came from patients Mason referred to him. He flicked the keyboard to confirm the final transfer of funds. 3 years ago, the Irish government offered him citizenship as a thank you when he performed difficult heart surgery for the Irish Minister of Health. At the time, it seemed like an honorary title, but Mason had the foresight to set up an Irish bank account and legal entity. The vast majority of his assets, real estate, investments, retirement funds, have now been transferred to these accounts, protected by Irish law and far from the jurisdiction of U.S. courts. Mason opens a third call, this time for his personal printing service. Is the package ready? All done, Dr. Reed. We have delivered 350 gift boxes to St. Patrick's Cathedral, sealed and numbered according to your instructions. What about special editions? 10 special editions have been individually packaged and labeled and will be hand-delivered to the designated recipients. Mason hung up the phone satisfied. Each gift box contains the same contents: traditional Jordan marzipan, a premium USB drive, and a letter printed on the finest ivory cardstock. On the drive were carefully organized copies of evidence: DNA test results, communication records, bank statements, surveillance photos, each clearly proving a deception that lasted 25 years. And those special editions contain additional details: evidence of Eduardo's medical fraud for hospital board members, evidence of Charlotte's knowing participation in the deception for Blake and his parents, and recordings of how Vanessa mocked them socially for her closest friends. Recordings. He opened the fourth folder, which was his future plans. At St. James Hospital in Dublin, a position as head of cardiac surgery was ready and waiting for him to take over. Hospital director Arthur O'Neill was ecstatic to be able to hire an internationally recognized surgeon of Mason's caliber, especially after he was granted Irish citizenship. Finally, Mason examined the educational trust document. Although he has severed financial ties with his children, he has established a strict educational trust fund. If they are willing to admit to the deception, publicly apologize, and abide by strict terms of good faith, they can still receive funds for their education. It was not out of compassion, but his final teaching: actions have consequences, but sincere repentance can open the way to rebuilding. Closing his laptop, Mason took a deep breath. It is time to head to church, not as a proud father, but as a man ready to expose the truth. As Mason walked into St. Patrick's Cathedral, Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, illuminating the century-old stone columns. Maria Santos, the wedding coordinator, was surprised to see him arrive so early. "Dr. Reed, we didn't expect you so early. The flower girls and decorations aren't quite ready yet." "It's okay, Maria. I need to use the altar room to prepare something. Please make sure the gift boxes are placed according to the seating chart." "Of course, Dr. Reed," she hesitated. "Your suit and other items are already in the groom's ready room." "I don't need those today, thanks." His voice was gentle but firm, leaving no room for discussion. In the altar closet, Mason opens the bag of papers he prepared last night. First up is a special letter to William Clark and the Blake family detailing Charlotte's deception and how she plans to have the two fathers walk down the aisle together. Then there was the letter of resignation to the Mount Sinai Hospital Board of Trustees, accompanied by a complete file on Eduardo's healthcare fraud. Finally, there are the divorce papers, already prepared by James and awaiting Vanessa's signature. By 7 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. The attendants followed Mason's instructions, informing them that the wedding had been canceled and handing out pre-prepared gift boxes. The chaos began almost immediately, with shocked shouts and angry whispers echoing through the cathedral as more and more people viewed the contents of the USB drive. William Clark was the first to burst into the altar room, his face blue and the letter clutched in his hand. "What does this mean, Reed? My daughter is getting married in 24 hours. "I'm afraid not, William. I'm sorry Blake got caught up in this, but after you've seen all the evidence, I think you'll understand." Mason calmly handed him a folder. "These are screenshots of text messages between Charlotte and Eduardo discussing how to cheat on me at the wedding, and her bank records, which show that she continued to accept my financial support for her medical school tuition while knowing the truth about biology." William's anger turns to shock, followed by horrified understanding. "Oh my God, does Blake know?" According to Sarah's investigation, Blake didn't know. It may be the only mercy. Meanwhile, hospital board member Jeffrey Thompson barges in, his USB drive in hand. "Mason, these allegations about Eduardo? It's unbelievable. But it's true, Jeff. Eduardo used his position to commit organized healthcare fraud for nearly 2 decades. False vasectomies are just the tip of the iceberg. All the evidence is on the drive, including his bank accounts, patient lists, and falsified medical records." Outside the church, the chaos is intensifying. Charlotte and the other kids broke out into a heated argument with Blake and his parents on the steps, with onlookers and paparazzi excitedly documenting every moment. Blake's mother, Caroline, shouted hysterically and questioned how Charlotte could have deceived the family. Just then, a black Mercedes brakes sharply in front of the church, and Vanessa rushes out with Eduardo. Vanessa is still in her robe and slippers, her makeup unfinished, and Eduardo's suit is untidy and his tie askew. "What happened?" Vanessa stormed into the altar room, her voice shrill. "What did you do, Mason?" Mason looked up calmly from behind his desk. His expression was as focused and calm as when performing precision surgery. "Just exposing the truth, Vanessa." For the first time in 25 years. Eduardo followed, trying to strike an authoritative pose, but his voice trembled slightly. "Think about what you're doing, Reed. Think of what you've done to the children." "My children." Mason's light laugh had no hint of humor. "Let's be precise, Eduardo. Precision is important to our profession, isn't it? They're your children. The DNA results from the gift box have proven that very clearly." He picked up the thick envelope on the table. "Divorce papers, Vanessa. My lawyer will be here shortly to witness your signature. But I thought you'd want to read the terms first." Vanessa snatched the envelope, her hand trembling as she read it, her face shifting from red to pale. "It's impossible. You couldn't have transferred everything. The house, the accounts." "The wonderful thing about Irish citizenship," Mason interrupted calmly, "is that it's quite useful in protecting assets. I learned about it after noticing certain irregularities in my children's medical records. Little things where the genetic markers didn't quite match, details that most people would overlook. But in heart surgery, attention to detail is crucial." Eduardo's confident facade crumbled. "The board will never believe dash." "The board has everything," Mason interrupted, "including a record of your creative approach to vasectomies. Tell me, how many other men have paid you to pretend to perform surgery? Insurance fraud alone is enough to pique the interest of the authorities." The commotion outside drew their attention. Through the elaborate windows of the altar room, they could see Charlotte arriving in her wedding dress, with Natalie and Daniel close behind. Their cell phones were bursting with messages from guests, driving them from the Plaza Hotel's ready suites in various states of dress. "Dad," Charlotte rushed into the room, her wedding dress trailing behind her. "What are you doing? You can't dash." "I'm sure you made it clear last night that I'm not your dad," Mason replied calmly. Although the performances over the years have certainly been impressive, all those Father's Day cards. The teary-eyed conversations about wanting to be like me in med school. "Charlotte T., you should consider acting instead of medicine." "You asshole," Natalie spat, her face contorting in anger. "We'll tell everyone how controlling you are, how you dash. Be my guest." Mason gestured to his cell phone on the table. "Social media is really quite powerful. But you might want to check your trust fund account first." As of midnight last night, they have been converted to educational trusts with fairly strict morality clauses, clauses that take a very negative view of long-term deception. Daniel, the youngest one, has been silent until now. "You can't prove anything. It's our word against." Evidence against 20 years. Mason raised one eyebrow. "Bank records showing Eduardo's payments since your births, DNA tests, surveillance photos." The board is particularly interested in the healthcare fraud component. As we speak, the door to the altar room opens again, and James Chun and a woman with a serious expression in a suit enter. "Dr. Reed." The woman nodded briefly. "I'm Patricia Mueller, Mount Sinai's legal counsel." She turned to Eduardo with an icy expression. "Soon to be your ex-wife, Eduardo." Eduardo's face turned pale. "Patri, I can explain dash. Save it for the board hearing and your medical malpractice insurance company's explanation," she interrupted him coldly. "Although I doubt they'll pay for willful fraud." So, James Chun stepped forward, papers in hand. "Mrs. Reed, shall we discuss the terms of the divorce? I suggest you sign them quickly. The news reporters will be here soon, and I think you'll prefer to leave before then." Vanessa frantically looks around the room for support. She's got nothing. Charlotte had collapsed into a wooden chair, her perfect makeup splattered from tears. Natalie stared at her in horror, watching her trust fund balance plummet. Daniel just looks lost. "You ruined everything," Vanessa whispered, her hand trembling as she took James' pen. "No, Vanessa," Mason corrected her gently. "You ruined everything. I just make sure the consequences fall where they should." When Vanessa signs off, Eduardo tries one last-ditch effort. "The hospital won't risk causing a scandal. My reputation is." "It's over," Patricia interrupts. "The board is having an emergency meeting. Dr. Reed's resignation letter contains fairly detailed evidence of your creative medical practices." Several other patients have stepped forward. Outside, the crowd of assembled guests had grown, their whispers coming through the stained glass windows, interspersed with the clicks of news cameras. This story is spreading like wildfire through the Manhattan medical community. "What about Blake?" Charlotte asked suddenly, her voice trailing off. "I need to talk to him," explained Dash. "Blake and his family left 20 minutes ago," Mason told her, "and apparently they take a very harsh view of being cheated out of paternity." William mentioned being glad the prenup hadn't been signed yet. The weight of consequence seems to have finally hit Eduardo. His tanned face turned gray, his usual bravado replaced by nervous frustration. "A medical malpractice lawsuit would destroy me. Vanessa, we need to." "Us." Vanessa's laugh was fragile. "There is no we, Eduardo. You promised you covered your tracks. You said the vasectomy record was perfect. You promised me." "Fascinating," Mason commented, watching their alliance crumble. 25 years of deception falling apart under 25 minutes of pressure. But I guess that's common in surgery. One little weakness and everything falls apart. James Chun cleared his throat. "Dr. Reed, the document has been signed. Should I submit it immediately?" "Please do so." Mason straightened his tie and checked his reflection in the window. "I believe my work is done." "You can't just leave," Natalie protested. "What about our tuition? Our livelihood? You owe us." "I owe my kids everything," Mason corrected her. "I owe Eduardo's kids nothing. Though if you choose to win them honestly, an educational trust still works. Think of it as a lesson in consequences." He picked up his briefcase and stopped at the door. "Oh, and Eduardo, The board might be interested in the other vasectomy cases you've handled, the ones done for Wall Street executives. I'm sure their wives would be very interested in your special services." The altar room fell silent as Mason left, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Through the window, they watched him walk into the morning light as photographers swarmed around him. But he passed through them with the same calm authority he had shown in the operating room. The Mercedes that had brought Vanessa and Eduardo earlier was now waiting for him, and his new chauffeur opened the door for him. As he settled into the leather seat, his cell phone vibrated to receive a message from the chief of surgery at St. James's Hospital in Dublin. "Position is ready. When can you come? Ireland is lucky to have you, Mason." He smiled slightly, watching his former family's world crumble through the tinted windows. Behind him, Eduardo faces the cold fury of his wife and the board's investigation. Vanessa's carefully constructed social world crumbles like a house of cards. Their children face the consequences of complicity and watch their privileged lives fall apart. But Dr. Mason Reed felt only the calm satisfaction a surgeon feels after a successful operation when diseased tissue is precisely removed, leaving room for healthy growth. His cell phone vibrated again, this time with a news alert. Mount Sinai scandal. Top surgeon exposes decades of deception. He turned off his cell phone and looked ahead to where the airport awaited his private jet. Dublin beckoned to him, offering not an escape, but a carefully planned new beginning. Behind him, the Manhattan medical community will be dealing with the fallout from this incident for months to come. None of them will ever forget the wedding that didn't take place, or the surgeon who turned his skills of precision and planning to a different type of cut. The private jet flew smoothly over the Atlantic as Mason sat in his leather seat and gazed through the porthole at the endless sea of clouds. The tranquility of the cabin contrasted with the chaos left in his wake. His cell phone had been turned off, cutting off the last connection to that storm in New York. But he knew that at the moment social media, medical circles, and gossip columns were exploding with the story how a top heart surgeon had exposed a deception that had lasted 25 years. The flight attendant quietly served him a glass of single malt scotch without ice. She recognizes him. Dr. Mason Reed is a celebrity in Ireland, and that legendary surgery for the Minister of Health has made him a national treasure. But she kept her distance professionally, sensing that the doctor needed space to be alone. Mason sipped the amber-colored liquid, his thoughts going back to a few hours ago. As he left the cathedral, the whole world seemed to stand still for a moment. The guests stood on the steps with those ivory-colored gift boxes in their hands, shock and disbelief written all over their faces. Reporters swarmed like wolves, but one look, one tiny gesture, and his security team formed a human wall to escort him toward the black Mercedes. It's an authority practiced in the operating room. No raised voices, no extra movements, just absolute control and precision. In that moment, he finally realized why he had been able to stay calm during the most complicated surgeries for years. That control wasn't learned. It was at the core of his character. It is also this trait that allows him to not explode when he discovers the truth, but to carefully plan every move. The airplane's satellite phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Only a very few people know this number. He picked up the phone. "Mason," James Chun's voice came from the other side of the Atlantic. "I thought you should know the developments." "Tell me." "It was a nuclear explosion. Eduardo has been suspended from the hospital, and the board held an emergency meeting to review all vasectomy cases. A preliminary investigation found at least 30 similar cases, mostly of Wall Street executives and celebrities. The insurance company has stepped in and denied any responsibility, claiming it was premeditated fraud." Mason nodded softly, though James on the other end of the line couldn't see it. "Where's Vanessa?" "Her nursing license has been temporarily suspended pending a hearing. The social circle had completely isolated her. Divorce papers have been filed, prepared in accordance with the dual jurisdiction of Ireland and New York, and her lawyers don't even have a leg to stand on to argue." "Where are the kids?" James paused. Charlotte's engagement has apparently fallen through. Blake's father called it the lucky escape of the century. Her attempts to contact Blake were warned by a lawyer's letter. Natalie's medical school admission was revoked by the morality clause. Her social media attacks backfired, and your former patients rushed to your defense. Daniel was told that there was no tuition for the next semester and that Yale would terminate his enrollment. Mason's expression didn't change, but his grip on his whiskey glass tightened slightly. It's not jubilation. It's not the satisfaction of revenge. It's a much more complex emotion. The serious acknowledgement of knowing that actions finally have corresponding consequences. How's the media coverage? The front page of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Medical Daily, all of them. But what's interesting is that the narrative has shifted. What started out as heart surgeon goes on revenge spree on daughter's wedding day has now become top doctor exposes decades-long healthcare fraud and family deception. Your former patients have come forward in your defense, recounting how you operated on poor children for free and took on the most difficult cases when no one else would take the risk. PR is not my goal, James. I know, but it will help you with your new start in Dublin. Speaking of which, Dr. Arthur O'Neill of St. James calls to make sure your office is ready. He said the Irish medical community was excited like St. Patrick's Day. Mason allowed himself a small smile. Anything else I should know? Sarah's investigation revealed that Eduardo had a secret apartment for private dates. Vanessa is obviously not the only one. There are also at least 3 nurses and 2 pharmacists. The news brought not jealousy, but a reaffirmation of his judgment. For 25 years, he has considered Eduardo his closest friend, yet is completely blind to the man's true nature. It made him rethink how many other things he thought he knew were actually false. How much trust had been betrayed. How many truths were hidden. Thanks for the update, James. I'll be in touch when Dublin lands. After hanging up, Mason gazed out the window at the darkening sky. At the moment in New York, they are facing the consequences of their actions while he flies off to a new life. The contrast is both poetic and just. Before the plane landed, the captain informed them that they would arrive in Dublin early. Night has fallen in Ireland, and the city lights twinkle in the mist like scattered diamonds. As the plane taxied to the private hangar, Mason saw a low-profile black sedan already waiting. Dr. Arthur O'Neill himself came to meet him, the chief surgeon of St. James's Hospital, a portly Irishman with typical Celtic red hair and a cheerful disposition. Mason, welcome to your new home. He shook hands warmly, as if they were old friends rather than co-workers who had just started working together professionally. I know you've been through a storm, but here you'll have a fresh start. Mason thanked him and the two got in the car. Arthur didn't mention the news story, instead focusing on future plans. We've got a team ready to go, all the best in Ireland. Your office overlooks the Liffey River and the lab is equipped with the latest equipment. The board of directors approved your entire proposed research program, especially your minimally invasive mitral valve repair technique. The car drove through the streets of Dublin at night, the old and modern intertwined cityscape flowing out the window. Mason gazed at the river, the bridges, and the old buildings and felt a strange calm. There is no shadow of betrayal here, no weight of lies. Only new beginnings and real opportunities. Your apartment is ready too, Arthur continued. A penthouse suite on the banks of the Liffey, just as you requested. The designer finished everything to your specifications. When they arrived at the apartment, Mason was amazed at how perfect it was. Simple yet elegant design, spaciousness, and floor-to-ceiling windows with breathtaking nighttime views of Dublin. There were no items to remind him of the life he once led, no family photos, no souvenirs of vacations spent together, nothing. It's a whole new canvas waiting to be filled with the colors of a new life. I'll see you tomorrow, Mason, Arthur said before leaving, rested and ready to start your Irish adventure. When alone, Mason walks toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lights of the Liffey River. He opened his cell phone and allowed the messages to pour in. Hundreds of missed calls, mostly from reporters and former co-workers. But a few came from family. Charlotte, Dad, please call me back. We need to talk. It was all a terrible misunderstanding. Natalie, how could you do this to us? My acceptance to medical school was revoked. I will never forgive you. Daniel, Eduardo refused to help me pay for school. You ruined my life. Vanessa, Mason, at least for the sake of the kids, we need to talk. The lawyer said you moved all your assets. How are we supposed to live? The last entry is from Eduardo. You win, read. The board is reviewing all my cases. My career is over. I hope you're satisfied. Mason has not responded to any messages. Instead, he dialed a number, his new lawyer in Dublin, Kevin O'Donoghue. Dr. Reed, I was expecting your call. The papers are ready. The foundation can be set up at any time. Great, Mason replied. Got the bylaws and board member list ready? Yes, sir. The Gilbert Foundation for Medical Ethics will focus on improving integrity and transparency in medical practice. We have contacted the ethicists and medical experts you recommended. Initial funds have been transferred from your Irish account. Mason hangs up and nods in satisfaction. Betrayal exposes a rotten system, but he won't stop there. He will create a positive legacy that ensures integrity and transparency in the medical community. It's not just revenge, it's rebuilding. The next morning, before even stepping out of his apartment, Mason gets a call from Sarah. I think you should see this, she said, with a hint of surprise in her voice. They didn't waste any time. She sent a link to a New York real estate website. Vanessa and Eduardo are selling one of their apartments in Queens, a property Mason didn't even know existed. The advertisement is described as urgent sale. Owner must leave quickly. Funny, Mason commented. It seems their great love isn't so sturdy in the face of reality. Indeed, Mount Sinai's hearing is scheduled for next week. Eduardo's attorney has contacted the district attorney in an attempt to reach a plea deal. Vanessa's nursing license hearing was the same week. Her social circle has completely collapsed and none of her friends are willing to testify on her behalf. Mason walked into St. James Hospital and immediately felt a very different vibe from Mount Sinai. There are no political battles here, no hypocritical socializing, just pure dedication to the medical profession. His new team surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurses were hand-picked professionals, chosen for their skill and integrity rather than their social connections or political loyalties. Everyone stood up when Mason walked into the conference room. This is not done out of fear or obligation, but with respect from the heart. It's good to see you all, Mason began, his voice calm and firm. I'm sure you've heard about my arrival in Dublin. Special circumstances. A light chuckle relieved the tension. I want to be clear. I'm not here to escape the past, but to create the future. At St. James, we will build a surgical center based on integrity and excellence. Everyone, doctors, nurses, technicians, has an honest responsibility to their patients and to each other. No secrets, no deception, no politics. Only the best healthcare. After the meeting, Mason walked into his new office. Spacious space with bookshelves on one wall and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the River Liffey on the other. There was only one note on the desk, from Arthur. Welcome to the real world, Mason. There is no perfect betrayal here, only a perfect new beginning. Your first surgery is scheduled for tomorrow, a complex aortic valve replacement. The patient was a 6-year-old girl, and other hospitals had rejected the risk of surgery. I know she'll be in the best hands. Mason picked up the medical records and began to study them. Work, real, meaningful work, is the best healing. Meanwhile, in New York, the storm continues to rage. Eduardo faces the hospital board and tries to defend himself, but the evidence is ironclad. Not only were there falsified vasectomy records, but there were also decades of financial fraud, using hospital resources for private profit and even jeopardizing patient safety in some cases. Dr. Mayer, board chair Jeffrey Thompson's voice was icy cold. After hearing the totality of the evidence, it is the unanimous decision of the board to immediately terminate your employment, revoke your privileges, and report the full findings to the medical board and law enforcement agencies. Facing the media cameras, Eduardo's once handsome and confident face has become pale and haggard. Reporters gathered around like sharks smelling blood. Dr. Mayer, what is your comment on cheating Dr. Reed for 25 years? How many medical records have you falsified? When did your relationship with Mrs. Reed begin? How long have the children known the truth? Eduardo didn't answer, just walked briskly towards the waiting vehicle with his head down, his once charming smile gone. Vanessa is in an equally difficult position. Her hearing was harsher than expected, and the evidence showed that she not only had knowledge of Eduardo's healthcare fraud, but also actively participated in falsifying records. The words of Margaret Wilson, chair of the Nursing Commission, were heavy as stone. Mrs. Reed, or do you prefer Mrs. Meyer now? The board found that you committed serious violations of nursing ethics, abused your position to facilitate medical fraud, and betrayed the patient trust and nursing oath. Your license is permanently revoked. As she left the hearing room, Vanessa saw a few close friends from her past social circle, women who had been photographed together at her charity events and who had envied her perfect marriage and family. Now they were turning their heads, pretending they hadn't seen her, or worse, whispering with hard-to-conceal gloating. For children, the reality is just as harsh. Charlotte's dreams of a medical career are shattered, and no hospital is willing to take a chance on hiring someone involved in such a scandal. Even more cruelly, her old circle of friends, those who had envied the high society life she was about to enter, now shunned her. Natalie found herself removed from all social media groups and unfollowed by former classmates. Her attempts to gain sympathy by bashing Mason backfired. Mason's former patients and co-workers came forward with stories about how he saved dying children when no one else would operate, and how he quietly did charity work when he wasn't on camera. Daniel, the youngest one, faces the most immediate blow. Without tuition, Yale denied him admission. What shocked him even more was Eduardo's indifference. When he asked for help, the man who claimed to be his biological father just waved his hand in annoyance. "I'm in too much trouble to worry about you right now." A month later, Mason completed his first major surgery at St. James, a complex heart repair on that 6-year-old girl. The operation was successful, and the impossible case that other hospitals had rejected now had a second chance at life. The entire team applauded spontaneously as he walked out of the operating room. "Remarkable surgery, Dr. Reed," Arthur exclaimed. "You've just done what other surgeons in Ireland thought was impossible." Mason smiled slightly. "I just did what I was supposed to do. Listen to what my heart was telling me." The heart never lies, Arthur. Both literally and metaphorically. Back at the apartment that night, Mason stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking out over Dublin at night. His cell phone lit up, displaying a message from James. Eduardo and Vanessa broke up. He reportedly accused her of not keeping the evidence. She claims he never really intended to marry her. Both faced serious financial difficulties, especially when civil lawsuits began to pile up. The children also moved out separately, each looking for a way out. The perfect betrayal ultimately betrays the betrayer himself. Mason didn't reply, just set his phone aside. There is no joy, no fulfillment, only a calm affirmation that the truth, no matter how painful, always reveals itself in the end. Just like in heart surgery, no matter how hidden the tumor is, it will eventually be found and removed. It's not the end, it's the beginning. Tomorrow, the Gilbert Foundation for Medical Ethics will officially launch. The day after tomorrow, he will begin teaching a new generation of medical students the importance of not only surgical skill, but also integrity. The fragments of the old life have been blown away by the wind, and the foundations of the new life have been laid. The perfect betrayal has accomplished its mission, not to bring destruction, but to catalyze rebirth. Mason raises his glass to the bright starry sky over the Liffey. In a way, he should be thankful for this betrayal, because it ultimately led him to a truer, more meaningful existence. A year later, the Dublin morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dr. Mason Reed's penthouse apartment, casting diamond-like patches of light on the walls. Over the course of the year, Dublin became not only his haven, but his Renaissance place. Mason stands in front of the window, checking the patient files on his tablet while enjoying his morning coffee. The Irish Times, spread out over his elegant breakfast bar, reported on his latest heart surgery innovation. Dublin's American surgeon pioneers revolutionary valve replacement technique. His cell phone vibrated, displaying a message from the chief of surgery at St. James Hospital. "The Board of Trustees approved your research funding, granting autonomy exactly as requested." They are still celebrating the poaching of star surgeons from Mount Sinai. A satisfied smile swept across his face. Betrayal stripped him of his innocence, but left him with something far more valuable: clarity. Now, every surgery, every innovation, every success is purely his own. No more false family ties or disguised loyalties clouding his judgment. His tablet beeped, displaying a news alert from New York that read, "Mount Sinai scandal update. Former section chief faces multiple lawsuits." The accompanying photograph shows Eduardo Mayer leaving the courthouse, his once meticulous appearance now haggard. The article details how more and more wealthy patients are coming forward to testify against fake vasectomies, with each lawsuit adding to the Eduardo account's depleting legal bills. A second reminder follows. Medical board hearing. Nursing license on trial in insurance fraud case. Pictures show Vanessa, her carefully maintained beauty fading under the pressure, hiding from press cameras. The truth about her involvement in Eduardo's program has been coming out over the past year. She helped falsify post-operative care records, making it easier for Eduardo to fake surgeries. Mason's private investigator was very thorough and exposed how Vanessa used her position as a nurse to facilitate fraudulent behavior. Each revelation strips away yet another layer of her social status, and as her former friends distance themselves from the scandal, she becomes more and more isolated. His internal communicator rang. "Dr. Reed, your 9 o'clock meeting with the research team is ready." "Thanks, Claire," he said as he gathered his materials, pausing only briefly to straighten his tie at the reflection of a framed article. Dublin Medical Excellence Award. Dr. Mason Reed honored for innovative heart surgery. The past year had revolutionized him, but not in the way the betrayers might have expected. There was no resentment, no consuming anger, only precise, calm concentration, traits that had made him a brilliant surgeon, now applied to every aspect of his life. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, his once carefully constructed family world continues to disintegrate. Charlotte sits in her small Manhattan studio apartment, staring at her cell phone screen at the announcement of Blake's wedding to his new fiancée, a society page story about a lightning-fast romance that began after a lucky escape from a fraudulent engagement. Her attempts to reach him were rewarded with a cease and desist letter from the Preston family's attorney. Her promised residency at a top hospital went up in smoke when the truth came out, and now she works as a locum tenens doctor at an urgent care clinic. Her dreams of following in the footsteps of any father have been dashed. Across town, Natalie faces her own crisis. She stood outside Mount Sinai Medical College and read the email for the 100th time. "Dear Ms. Gilbert, after reviewing recent events and in accordance with our ethics clause, we regret to inform you that your admission to Mount Sinai Medical College has been revoked. Her carefully planned future of following Mason's path to surgical excellence is gone." The trust morality clause meant she couldn't even afford to apply to a lower-level school. Her attempts to portray Mason as a control freak on social media backfired when his former patients and co-workers flocked to the internet to tell of his kindness and integrity. A post that went viral read, "After 20 years of performing life-saving surgeries on children for free, Dr. Reed gave my daughter a future when no one else would even try, while his own children tried to destroy him with lies." Daniel, the youngest one, faces the most brutal awakening of all. He was sitting in the Yale finance office, trying to keep his composure, when the administrator informed him of the latest news. "I'm sorry, Mr. Clark, but without next semester's tuition, we will have to revoke your enrollment." "My father, Eduardo Mayer," Daniel stammered, "promised to pay. Dr. Mayer's office has informed us that he is unable to provide funding due to ongoing legal issues," said the administrator, whose tone was hardly sympathetic. "Perhaps you should contact Dr. Reed and ask about reinstating your educational trust." But Daniel knew the choice came with strings attached that he wasn't yet ready to recognize. The trust ethics clause requires a public acknowledgement of one's role in the deception and a formal apology. The same pride, the kind that had led him to participate in ridiculing the man who had raised him, now prevented him from taking the road to redemption. That night, in a modest Queens apartment, Vanessa organizes overdue notices while Eduardo paces, his designer leather shoes fraying the worn carpet. The medical malpractice insurance company made its final decision today, he cursed, waving a letter, and they refused to pay anything. Intentional fraud to void the policy. "You promised me they'd never find out," Vanessa hissed, cracks appearing in her perfectly maintained facade. "You said the record was perfect. You promised that your record of care would support my surgery," Eduardo shot back. "And now look at us. I'm about to lose my license, your nursing career is under scrutiny, and your precious social status is gone." "At least I'm not the one facing criminal charges," Vanessa snapped. "How many fake vasectomies have you had, 20? 30? You didn't complain when those fake surgeries funded our children's lifestyles," Eduardo retorted. "Or when my academic advising payments let you wear designer clothes." Their heated argument was interrupted by a phone call from their lawyer. "More bad news," Eduardo announced as he hung up. 3 more patients have joined the class action. Their wives are particularly interested in the fertility clinic records you helped falsify, Vanessa. Her response was interrupted by a notification on her cell phone. Another former friend had publicly unfollowed her on social media. Her carefully crafted image as an elite Manhattan medical power couple has crumbled, replaced by whispers and backbiting at every charity event and social gathering. And in Dublin, Mason is reviewing applications for his department's latest innovation, a medical ethics fellowship focused on integrity in patient care. The irony was not lost on him. The betrayal of his former family sparked an initiative that would shape the future of healthcare professionals. His assistant interrupts with a message. Dr. Reed, the Mount Sinai Board of Trustees has sent another invitation for you to return as Chief of Cardiac Surgery. Decline, he replied without hesitation, but send them my latest research paper on ethical guidelines for medical practice. They seemed to need it. The sun was sinking in the west, and the sky over the Liffey was drenched in amber and gold. In the reflection in the window, Mason sees not a victim of betrayal, but a man who has turned deception into determination and betrayal into a breakthrough. Tomorrow will bring new surgeries, new innovations, new opportunities to save lives. The past is exactly where it should be behind the scenes, as a more valuable foundation than false family ties. A legacy built on truth. 6 months later, Mason's primary surgical team at St. James completed its 50th revolutionary heart surgery. This technique, which was only a concept before he came to Dublin, has now become the international standard for complex mitral valve repair. Medical journals were clamoring for coverage of this Dublin breakthrough, and patients came from all over the world to seek treatment. At the celebration following that landmark surgery, Arthur raised his glass in a toast to Mason Reed, a man who turned adversity into excellence. When fate gives you lemons, you not only make lemonade, you create a whole new lemonade recipe. Laughter echoed through the room, but Mason noticed an uninvited guest in the corner, a young man, dressed in a hospital janitor's uniform, mopping the floor. The face caught his attention, and after a few seconds he recognized the young man, Daniel. After the celebration, Mason walked straight to Daniel, who was emptying the trash cans. The young man stiffened as he saw him approach, shame and surprise flashing across his face. Daniel, Mason's voice was calm, no anger or false warmth. I didn't expect to see you here. I need to work, Daniel whispered, avoiding Mason's gaze. The scholarship's gone, and I got dropped from Yale. Eduardo said he couldn't afford dash. He paused, realizing he was almost complaining about his biological father abandoning him, just as they had abandoned Mason together. Why did you come to Dublin? Because no one knows who I am, Daniel replied bitterly. In New York, I'm that Reed scandal kid. Here, I'm just another American trying to start over. Mason studied the young man who had once been his youngest son. Pride has been rubbed out and replaced with a humility Daniel has probably never experienced before. The humility of needing to earn a living through manual labor. The education trust is still in effect, Mason said simply, and the terms haven't changed. Daniel gulped and nodded. I know. I understand now. You've always taught us about integrity and the consequences of our actions. I laughed at it all. Now I understand. Mason didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out the window at the Dublin night sky. Come to my office at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, he said finally, and we'll talk about your options. Get some rest after the night shift. Back at his apartment that night, Mason received another email from James with an update from the New York Times. Mount Sinai scandal continues to fester. Mayor faces criminal charges. The article details how the district attorney decided to file charges of criminal fraud and falsifying medical records against Eduardo after a thorough investigation. Accompanying photos show an emaciated Eduardo being led from the courtroom, his once shiny Italian-tailored suit having been replaced by a faded piece of store-bought goods. Another article mentions that Vanessa has lost her nursing license and now works as a cashier at a fast food restaurant. Her last social media post was announcing her move out of Manhattan, starting over after 2 decades of marriage and career, with no mention of the lies that marriage was built on or how that career ended in fraud. The story on Charlotte and Natalie is much briefer. Charlotte now works in a small practice, far from the surgical career she once dreamed of. Natalie has retired from social media altogether and is reportedly attending a nursing assistant program at a community college, much lower than she ever dreamed of for her medical career. Mason closes his laptop and walks to the balcony overlooking Dublin at night. The city gave him a rebirth, and he returned the favor with innovation and excellence. The Gilbert Foundation for Medical Ethics has funded 10 research projects focused on integrity in medical practice. The next morning, unsurprisingly, Daniel showed up at his office right on time. The young man looked tired but determined, the kind of determination Mason had seen so often in the mirror. "I'm ready," Daniel said simply. "I'm ready to admit my mistakes, apologize, and try to make amends." Mason pointed to a document with the terms of the educational trust. "This isn't about punishment, Daniel. It's about understanding how behavior affects others and how to rebuild trust that has been destroyed by betrayal." "I see," Daniel said. "We not only lied to you, we laughed at you. We enjoy your support while laughing at your ignorance behind your back. I can't imagine what that betrayal feels like. But you can now," Mason pointed out calmly. "Eduardo betrayed you too. He promised to take care of you, but abandoned you when things got tough." Daniel nodded, a spark of understanding in his eyes. "That's why you turned the trust into an education fund instead of cutting it off altogether. You've given us the chance to rebuild, if we're willing to face the truth. Honesty is always the only way to move forward," Mason replied, "both in medicine and in life." 2 months later, Mason stood at the podium of St. James Hospital's largest lecture hall in front of eager medical students and residents. In the audience, Daniel sits in the back row, neatly dressed in shirt and tie, no longer a janitor but a student in the medical management program. "Today we're not just talking about heart surgery techniques," Mason begins, "but the ethical underpinnings that make these techniques meaningful. Excellence is not just about skills, it's also about integrity." During his presentation, Mason noticed a woman walk into the back door of the lecture hall and sit quietly in the last row. Dr. Sarah Collins, St. James' new ethics director, was just recruited from Boston. Her expertise and passion for healthcare ethics are impressive, but what attracted Mason even more was her forthrightness and honesty. She didn't hesitate to point out ethical gaps in the hospital's own policies in front of the screening committee. After the presentation, medical students gathered around Mason to ask questions. As the crowd disperses, Sarah approaches. "Impressive presentation, Dr. Reed," she said, "especially the section on how to balance technical excellence and ethical integrity in the practice of medicine." "Thank you, Dr. Collins. I believe the truth is just as important as the technology." "Speaking of the truth," she continued, her blue eyes looking straight at him, "I know your story. Most medical professionals know that. But I'm more interested in how you turn that experience into this positive force. Most will crumble or be consumed by vengeance." Mason considered for a moment. Perhaps the secret lies in the way in which betrayal is viewed, not as an end, but as a revelation. It reveals what is true and what is false. After removing the diseased tissue, the healthy part can grow stronger. Sarah smiled, an understanding smile. "I want to hear more. Perhaps over dinner? Purely as a coworker, sure." "I think I'd like that," Mason replied, feeling a warmth that had been absent for a long time. Not false intimacy based on lies, but the possibility of real connection based on shared values and mutual respect. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Vanessa and Eduardo's great love story is coming to an insignificant end. In a small courtside cafe, they coldly signed the final financial arrangements. Both were bankrupt and had nothing to divide, except their debts. "That's it," Eduardo said, without the charm in his voice that had seduced Vanessa back then. 25 years of a relationship, and that's the end of it. "What did you expect?" Vanessa responds bitterly. "A romantic ending? The revelation that the relationship we built on lies was destroyed. That's what we deserve." Eduardo looked at her and suddenly realized that he had never really known this woman, despite spending a quarter of a century together. Maybe Mason's right. Maybe honesty really is the only way. "It's too late for that now," Vanessa said, getting up and leaving without looking back. Their relationships begin with deception, end with remorse, and in between are filled with the damage they've done to the one person who truly deserves a better life. In Dublin, a new day breaks. Mason runs along the banks of the River Liffey on his morning run as the early morning sun shines on the thousand-year-old city. A year ago, his life was changed forever by betrayal, but rather than be destroyed, he chose to rebuild, not just his personal life, but his professional legacy. The Gilbert Foundation for Medical Ethics is now a major force in the medical community. Daniel is rebuilding his life through honest work, and perhaps Sarah represents the possibility of a new relationship based on truth rather than deception. Mason stops to enjoy the sunrise over the Liffey River. The perfect betrayal ultimately brings the perfect revelation that honesty, no matter how painful, is always the only true way forward. 10 years later, the winter sun shines through the glass walls of the Gilbert Center for the Study of Medical Ethics at St. James Hospital, casting a warm glow on Dr. Mason Reed's desk. He is reviewing the latest batch of applicants for the scholarship, a program that has trained nearly 100 healthcare professionals who uphold a philosophy of integrity. On the wall hangs the cover of the Journal of Medical Ethics, with the striking title, Reconstruction After Betrayal: How the Gilbert Model of Medical Ethics is Changing Global Medical Culture. At 52, Mason is now gray-haired, but his gaze is still sharp and he operates with undiminished precision. 10 years had left traces of wisdom on his face, not bitter indentations. His wedding ring shimmers in the sunlight. 5 years ago, he started a new family with Sarah Collins, whose ethics and professional pursuits are highly compatible and whose marriage is built on a solid foundation of integrity and mutual respect. There was a soft knock on the office door, and his assistant Fiona walked in. "Dr. Reed, the video conference with the IMEC will begin in 10 minutes. Daniel has the conference room ready." Mason nodded his thanks. Daniel, once his youngest son, is now the Gilbert Foundation's program coordinator. That once proud and cocky boy has undergone a complete transformation from hospital cleaner to Bachelor of Management to Master of Healthcare Management. He proved himself with honest effort and became one of the most valuable members of the foundation. On his way to the conference room, Mason passed the hospital's main hallway, where the walls were covered with photos of the foundation's decade-long accomplishments. One of them caught his eye, a ribbon-cutting ceremony 5 years ago, when the Gilbert Children's Heart Center was officially opened. That center specializes in providing free heart surgeries to children from poor families and has saved hundreds of young lives. In the conference room, Daniel had set up the video system. At 30, he had grown into a confident professional with a composure and sincerity in his eyes that was completely absent back then. "Everything's ready, Mason," Daniel said, no longer using the terms doctor or mister. Over the years, they have developed a peculiar relationship, not father and son, but closer than your average coworker, built on shared values and mutual respect. Today, we will discuss plans to promote ethical guidelines in developing countries. "Thanks, Daniel. Is your evaluation report on the Nigerian project ready?" "Yes, the full report was sent to all participants. I particularly emphasized the local cultural context of the approach to integrity education." Mason nodded in appreciation. Daniel's growth has been one of his greatest satisfactions, watching a once-lost young man find his way and commit to helping others do the same. Mason's cell phone vibrates before the video conference begins. It was a message from Sarah, "Going to the restaurant directly after my presentation this afternoon. Remember 6 o'clock. Love you." He smiled and replied, then turned off his phone. Sarah is now vice president of the European Society for Medical Ethics, and the two have complementary careers in promoting integrity reform in medical practice worldwide. The meeting went well. Medical ethics experts from around the world discussed the implementation of the Gilbert model in their respective countries. The model, which integrates ethics education into every stage of medical training, creates an anonymous reporting system to protect whistleblowers, and provides incentives for honest practice, has been replicated in medical schools and hospitals on 4 continents. Mason listened to the reports and felt a calm satisfaction in his heart. That betrayal a decade ago has now been transformed into a global positive impact. Instead of being wasted, the pain became a catalyst for change. After the meeting, Daniel stayed behind to organize the materials. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I got an email from Charlotte recently." Mason raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt. "She works at a community clinic that focuses on healthcare for low-income families. She said it allowed her to find some sort of redemption. She asked about you and wanted to know if you were okay." Mason ponders for a moment. Tell her I'm fine. If she truly wants to re-establish contact, the doors of the Gilbert Foundation are always open to her. Same conditions, honesty about the past, and commitment to a better future. Daniel nodded. I'll pass it on. How's Natalie? Any news of her? According to James' report last month, she completed her nursing degree and is now working at a hospital in Chicago. She didn't try to connect, but at least she found a professional direction. The two men fall silent for a moment, thinking about the fragmented state of that former family. Eventually, Mason pats Daniel on the shoulder. Well, I have to go get dinner ready. Sarah has a big speech today, and we're celebrating. As he left the hospital, Mason drove through the familiar streets of Dublin. In 10 years, the city has become a real home, more real than the mansion in Manhattan that was built on a lie. He and Sarah live in a Victorian home on the banks of the River Liffey, warm and cozy, with walls filled with photos of real memories, their hikes in the Scottish Highlands, their vacations in Tuscany, Italy, their medical volunteering in Kenya. At the restaurant, Mason chose a quiet corner seat with a perfect view of the sunset over the Liffey. He ordered a scotch and waited for Sarah's arrival while his thoughts drifted across the Atlantic. He rarely follows those people anymore, but James, as his legal counsel and friend, still provides regular updates on important information. Last month's report showed that Eduardo had finally served his community service sentence, with charges of healthcare fraud and insurance fraud that landed him in federal prison for 3 years, followed by 5 years of community service. Now 66 years old, pale and gaunt, he works as an odd-job man at a small clinic in the Bronx, never again having the opportunity to touch patients or perform medical procedures. As for Vanessa, the report mentions that she moved to a small town in Florida to work as a receptionist at a nursing home. Her social media accounts stopped updating years ago, and the social image she once maintained at all costs is gone. What's ironic is that her current supervisor is one of Mason's patients from back in the day when he was undergoing chemotherapy. It sure is a small world sometimes. Sarah's arrival interrupted his thoughts. She walked gracefully towards him, dressed in a simple navy blue suit, her blonde hair pulled back into a simple bun. At 50, she exudes a confidence and elegance that is true to the charisma Mason has never seen in Vanessa. Sorry for the delay, she smiled as she sat down. The question and answer session after the presentation was extended. Young physicians are particularly interested in ethical case studies. I'm guessing you used the Reed case as an example? Mason asked, half-jokingly. Of course, Sarah laughed softly. It's become a standard text in medical school ethics courses. But what I emphasize is not the betrayal itself, but how you turn it into a positive impact. The waiter brought the menu. They ordered, and the conversation continued. I got an interesting call today, says Sarah, from the Pratt Institute of Art in New York. A young girl named Emma Reed was awarded our medical illustration scholarship. She mentioned you as her uncle in her application letter. Mason raised an eyebrow in surprise. Daniel's sister? I didn't know she was interested in the medical arts. Obviously, she's very talented. The jury said her illustrations of cardiac anatomy were very precise and artistic at the same time. In her letter, she wrote that although she had never met you, your story inspired her to use her artistic talents in the medical field. Mason pondered the message. Eduardo and Vanessa's child, a niece he has never met, is inspired by his story. It was an impact he never anticipated. Do you think I should contact her? He asked Sarah, sincerely seeking her advice. It depends on whether you're ready to connect with that world again, Sarah replies, understanding the long-healed but still present scars in Mason's mind. But I think if this young man is sincere, maybe this is another form of healing. After dinner, they took a walk along the River Liffey, enjoying the tranquility of a Dublin winter night. The storm of 10 years ago has now subsided, replaced by a deep calm. Mason remembers the vow he made when he left New York not to escape, but to rebuild. Today, he has not only rebuilt his life, he has created a legacy that can impact medical practices around the world. Back at home, Mason turned on his computer in his study and decided to write an email to this Emma Reed, whom he had never met. As he typed, he pondered how to explain to a young man the storm that had changed everyone's lives, how to describe the pain of betrayal and the possibility of growing from it. He wrote, Dear Emma, I'm Mason Reed, and your scholarship application caught my eye. First of all, Congratulations on your accomplishment. The use of artistic talent in the medical field is a unique and valuable contribution. We have never met, but fate has connected us in a strange way. You may have heard the story about your parents and me. That story has become a case study in medical ethics courses. But I think for all you know, it may just be the version told by someone else. If you would like, I would be happy to meet and talk while you are here in Dublin to study, not to open old wounds, but to share experiences about how to grow from betrayal, how to transform pain into purpose, how to build an authentic life on the rubble of lies. Whatever you decide, remember, we are not defined by the behaviors of others toward us, but by how we respond to those behaviors. Your scholarship is not only a recognition of your artistic talent, but also of your choice of the path of integrity. Looking forward to your reply. Sincerely, Dr. Mason Reed, President, Gilbert Foundation for Medical Ethics. After sending the email, Mason walks to the bedroom where Sarah is already reading a book. She looked up and smiled. Finished writing? Yes, he replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. I told her we could meet if she wanted. Are you really ready? Mason thinks for a moment, then nods. I think so. 10 years ago, I left New York filled with a sense of anger and betrayal. I want justice, the truth. I now have more than I could have ever imagined. Meaningful work, authentic relationships, positive impact. I no longer need the validation of old wounds. Sarah shook his hand. That's why the Gilbert model of medical ethics has been so successful, because it's not just about exposing wrongs. It's about creating the right environment. You didn't just punish betrayal. You built a system where integrity could flourish. The next morning, Mason arrived at the office early to find Daniel already there, preparing materials for the day's meeting. Good morning, Mason greeted. You're early. There are some documents that need to be ready before the meeting, Daniel replied, then added with some hesitation. And I want to tell you something. Mason waited, giving the young man space to organize his words. I accepted a job offer from Boston General Hospital, Daniel eventually said, and their medical management department needed a program manager who focused on ethical practices. Mason felt a rush of mixed emotions, pride, dismay, and a hint of nostalgia for the past. It's a great opportunity, Daniel. There are great teams there. Yes, but Daniel looked Mason straight in the eye. It means I have to go back to America and face the past. I will use the last name Reed again. People will remember that scandal and ask questions. Are you ready? Daniel took a deep breath. I think so. Working here over the years, I've learned the importance of facing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Going back won't be easy, but it's the next step in my journey. Mason nodded in understanding. Daniel's choices demonstrate his growth, from a young man who runs away from his responsibilities to a mature man willing to face his past and build a future. The foundation will support you, Mason said, and feel free to let me know if you need any references or resources. Thank you. Daniel paused, then added softly. Not just for the job offer. Thank you for not giving up on me. You gave me a path to change when I least deserved a second chance. There was a slight knock at the office door, and Sarah walked in, tablet in hand. Good morning, gentlemen. I have good news to share. She handed Mason the tablet. The screen shows a reply email from Emma Reed. Dear Dr. Reed, thank you very much for your email and congratulations. I was both surprised and touched to receive your response. Yes, I've heard different versions of that story from my parents, from media reports, from medical ethics course cases. But I've always wondered about your perspective. As a child growing up in the aftermath of that storm, I had a special hunger for the truth. I have accepted a scholarship to study in Dublin for a semester next month. I very much look forward to meeting and talking with you if you wish. It's not about digging up past hurts. It's about understanding how to grow from them. Your mention of turning pain into purpose is exactly the answer I've been looking for. You may not know this, but your story and the work of the foundation has been an inspiration to me. The path of medical illustration was chosen in part because of the desire to convey the values of integrity and transparency while conveying medical knowledge through the visual language. Looking forward to seeing you in Dublin. Sincerely, Emma Reed. Mason reads the email and hands the tablet back to Sarah, feeling a strange sense of calm. That perfect betrayal a decade ago has now transformed into a lesson in integrity, recovery, and medical ethics that will impact the next generation. Later that afternoon, Mason stood in the rooftop garden of St. James Hospital, overlooking a panoramic view of Dublin. This city has become his true home, and the people here have embraced him, not because of his social status or wealth, but because of his professional contributions and the positive impact he has made on the community. 10 years ago, when he stepped onto that plane out of New York, he had no idea how the future would unfold. All he knew was that he needed to be honest, to rebuild, to create something meaningful out of the rubble of lies. Now, looking back on the journey, he realizes that it may have been the most imperfect result of that perfect betrayal. It created something far more valuable than what it tried to destroy. Mason's cell phone rang with a message from Sarah. The board voted unanimously to approve the international expansion plan. Starting next year, the Gilbert model of medical ethics will be replicated in 5 Asian countries. He smiled and replied, "Fantastic. Buy a bottle of champagne on the way home to celebrate." Sliding his cell phone back into his pocket, Mason took one last look at the Dublin skyline before turning back to his office. Tomorrow will be a new day, bringing new challenges and new opportunities to prove that integrity is not just a personal choice, but a professional calling. The perfect betrayal culminated in an imperfect but authentic rebirth, one that had a profound impact not only on Mason personally, but on the medical profession as a whole. Those who try to build a perfect life out of lies end up losing everything, and the one who chooses to face the truth and rebuild from it creates a legacy that transcends personal gain and loss. As the sun sinks in the west and the lights of Dublin come on one by one, Dr. Mason Reed turns off the lights in his office and walks to the elevator, his heart filled with anticipation for the future. In a way, that betrayal was the best gift he'd ever received. It revealed what was false, while shining a light on what the real was worth. And that, perhaps, is the perfect revenge, not to destroy, but to create, not to hate, but to heal, not to dwell on the past, but to build a brighter future. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.